Imagine a child repeatedly crying out for help, from daycare, from the hospital, even from her own father, yet the very system created to protect her failed to act. The story of Aniya Day-Garrett became one of the cases that sparked outrage across the United States. Many people began asking the same question: what truly happened? Aniya Day-Garrett was born on September 2, 2013, in the city of Euclid, Ohio, United States. She was the daughter of Sierra Day and Michael Garrett, who were never married and had separated when Aniya was still very young, before she reached her second birthday. After the relationship ended, custody of Aniya remained with Sierra, while Michael, although no longer living with his daughter, still tried to remain part of her life in every way he could. People who met Aniya often remembered her as a lively, friendly, and affectionate little girl. She loved singing and dancing and often brought a cheerful energy to those around her. Pink was Aniya's favorite color, a small detail that reflected the innocence of a child just beginning to discover the world. Yet behind that bright image was a family environment marked by deep fractures, quietly shaping the difficult path that would unfold in the life of this young child. As Aniya grew older, the colorful picture of her early childhood began to show troubling signs. Around 2016, concerns about her health gradually became more noticeable. During scheduled visitation times, Mikkel began observing unusual marks on Aniya's body that he could not ignore. On several occasions, he noticed bruises on her chest and back. But whenever he asked about them, Sierra Day explained that they were simply minor accidents from a child playing. Over time, however, those explanations only made Mikkel more worried rather than reassured. The relationship between the two grew increasingly tense, and arguments about Aniya's care became more frequent. Eventually, Sierra filed for a protective order against Mikkel, accusing him of harassment and of exceeding the boundaries of his court-ordered visitation rights. The court's decision significantly limited Mikkel's ability to contact Sierra or see Aniya directly. Each visit now had to take place through a third party, such as a social worker or a court-appointed supervisor, making it far more difficult for him to monitor and protect his daughter's well-being. After the tensions within the family grew, Sierra gradually withdrew from people around her and began limiting Aniya's contact with relatives outside the household. She refused support from Aniya's father and the paternal family, and instead decided to enroll her daughter in a daycare facility. Aniya was later registered at Harbor Crest Daycare in the city of Euclid, Ohio. However, not long after she began attending, caregivers started noticing unusual signs on Aniya's body. Over time, they repeatedly documented scratches, injuries with unclear causes, and sometimes bruises on her face. These observations were not treated as isolated incidents, but were carefully recorded in detailed reports. In total, 18 reports were written by daycare staff and submitted to management, reflecting growing concern about Aniya's condition. In one of those reports, a staff member specifically noted that whenever the unusual signs were brought up, Sierra often dismissed the concerns and claimed that her daughter was either imagining things or not telling the truth. By May 2017, the concerning signs became more apparent when Aniya arrived at daycare with swelling on her head and several scratches on her face. When caregivers asked what had happened, the little girl told them, "Mom pushed me down the stairs." However, Sierra Day quickly offered a different explanation, saying her daughter had simply fallen while playing at a park. A few days later, Aniya returned to daycare and complained of a headache. When staff examined her more closely, they noticed blister-like marks on her scalp. Sierra again provided another explanation, claiming it was only an allergic reaction to a body wash she had been using. Not long afterward, the story changed once again when she suggested the marks might have come from Aniya's hair being braided too tightly. Yet when Aniya was spoken to privately, her account was very different from what her mother had described. The girl stated, "Mom hurt me." Because of the noticeable difference between the two explanations, the daycare manager decided to report the situation to the police. Aniya was then taken to the hospital for a medical examination. Despite the multiple reports and medical evaluations, the child was ultimately allowed to return home with her mother, and the concerns surrounding Aniya's condition remained unresolved. Concerns surrounding Aniya's condition continued to grow in July 2017, when Sierra began a relationship with a man named Deontay Lewis. At that time, Deontay was 26 years old and worked as a local security officer, with no significant criminal record. However, according to several family members, his personality was described as controlling, and his presence in Sierra's life appeared to increase the tension within the household. Mikhail, Aniya's biological father, was already aware of several earlier reports regarding his daughter's condition, but he also personally observed additional troubling signs during his visits with her. During one visit in September 2017, Mikhail noticed bruises on Aniya's body. On another occasion, he discovered that one of Aniya's teeth had been damaged, but had not yet been treated. Concerned about his daughter's health, Mikhail took photographs as evidence and submitted his own report to authorities in the Euclid area and Cuyahoga County. Despite the repeated petitions Mikhail filed with the court expressing concern for Aniya's safety, no specific intervention was carried out, allowing the troubling signs surrounding the child to continue for several more months. A few months later, in December 2017, the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services received an urgent report concerning suspected violence and neglect involving Aniya. A social worker was sent to the apartment where Sierra was living in the city of Euclid to assess the situation. During that visit, the worker observed that Aniya still had several unusual marks on her body, including bruises and injuries with unclear causes. However, after a basic inspection of the apartment and confirming that the home had electricity, running water, food, and other basic necessities, the final report concluded that the child's living environment, overall, met the required standards. Authorities informed Mikhail that the case was under review, but in reality, the visit did not lead to any deeper investigation. Around that time, seemingly aware that attention was beginning to focus on her situation, Sierra made a new decision. She withdrew Aniya from Harbor Crest Daycare and enrolled her in another facility. The new place was a preschool in Euclid called Get Ready, Set, Grow, which also happened to be where Sierra was working. This decision unintentionally made it more difficult to monitor Aniya's condition, because the people who had previously documented the troubling signs no longer had contact with her. When Aniya began attending the new preschool, Get Ready, Set, Grow in Euclid, many people around her quickly noticed that her conditions seemed to have worsened significantly compared to before. Staff members observed that Aniya appeared thin, lacking energy, and often withdrawn, rarely interacting with the other children. Some of Sierra's co-workers questioned why the girl's weight seemed so low, but Sierra consistently reassured them that her daughter had always been naturally small and that there was nothing seriously wrong. Because Sierra herself was an employee at the school, monitoring Aniya's condition became more difficult. The caregivers who had previously documented many of the concerning signs no longer had contact with the child, and the new environment lacked the independent oversight that might have raised additional concerns. Moving Aniya from Harbor Crest to the place where her mother worked unintentionally reduced the chances that warning signs might be noticed and properly recorded. By January 2018, a significant development occurred when the investigation involving Sierra Day, conducted by authorities in the Cleveland area and Cuyahoga County, was officially closed. The case file was considered insufficient to move forward, even though there had previously been several notable elements, such as medical examinations, photographs documenting injuries, witness accounts, and even statements from Aniya herself. This decision meant that the concerns surrounding the child's condition were no longer being formally monitored. In that situation, Aniya, who was only 4 years old at the time, continued living in an environment that was becoming increasingly concerning. Behind the doors of the apartment where she lived with her mother in Euclid, what happened in the following weeks was almost entirely unseen by anyone outside. A social worker who had previously visited the home had planned to return to meet Aniya on March 9, 2018, but that appointment was later postponed by Sierra Day to March 12. Tragically, that meeting never took place. At approximately 3:24 p.m. on March 11, 2018, Deontay Lewis called the emergency number 911 and reported that Aniya had fallen from a toilet and was experiencing severe breathing problems. After nearly 4 minutes of conversation, Sierra Day took over the call and told the dispatcher that when she placed her hand near Aniya's nose, she could not feel any breath. The dispatcher immediately instructed her to begin CPR to assist the child. However, during the call, there was no clear indication that those instructions were actually being followed. What drew the dispatcher's attention even more was that the tone of both Sierra and Deontay throughout the call seemed unusually calm for the emergency situation they were describing. At approximately 3:37 p.m. that same day, emergency responders transported Aniya to Euclid General Hospital. When medical personnel and police officers arrived earlier at the apartment, they quickly noticed several unusual signs inside the living space. There was a strong smell of bleach in the home, as if the area had been cleaned in a hurry. Aniya's mattress had almost no bedding left on it, only a small fleece blanket, and there was a damp, unpleasant odor around it. While checking the apartment, officers also discovered that several documents related to the custody dispute between Mikal and Sierra had been torn into pieces and thrown into the trash. The kitchen contained very little food, aside from 2 unfinished Chipotle meals placed inside the microwave. However, what caught the attention of the first responders most was the position in which Aniya was found. She was dressed in winter clothing and lying on the floor directly beneath a running air conditioning unit, even though the March weather in Ohio was still cold. This unusual arrangement led investigators to suspect that the scene may have been altered before they arrived, possibly in an attempt to conceal signs related to the child's condition. In addition, the location where Aniya was found did not match the initial explanation given by Sierra Day and Deontay Lewis that the child had fallen from a toilet. Instead, Aniya was lying in a completely different area of the apartment. When medical personnel examined her, they noticed that her body had already begun showing signs of stiffness, suggesting that her death may have occurred sometime earlier. Aniya's face appeared pale, her lips were dry and cracked, and her overall physical condition showed signs of prolonged physical decline. She appeared noticeably thin, consistent with long-term malnutrition. On Aniya's face, there was also a large bruise near the cheek area, along with a small tear above it. In addition, first responders observed several other marks on her body, including bruises and signs of earlier injuries. Her skin also showed signs of deterioration related to ongoing health problems. Around her legs, there were signs of skin irritation, consistent with remaining in the same position for an extended period of time, further raising concerns that Aniya may not have received proper care during the final days before the situation was discovered. When questioned by police at the apartment, Sierra and Deontay gave the same explanation, stating that earlier that morning, Aniya had fallen from the toilet, hit her head, and later lost consciousness. Sierra also added that her daughter had not eaten anything since the previous Thursday, about 4 days earlier, because after eating at a Red Lobster restaurant in the area, the child became ill and no longer wanted to eat. However, this account quickly raised questions when investigators began speaking with other family members. Sierra's brother, Isaiah Day, later told authorities that Aniya's condition may have lasted much longer than Sierra had described. Isaiah recalled that in February 2018, when he visited the apartment, he saw Aniya lying motionless on a bed. When he asked if she was okay, Sierra simply responded, "Yes," and appeared surprisingly calm about her daughter's condition. She told him that Aniya was eating very little because she was weak. According to Isaiah's own observations, however, the child's condition at that time already seemed deeply concerning, with signs suggesting that Aniya was experiencing serious difficulty moving. Despite this, Isaiah did not report the situation to authorities at the time. It was only after Aniya's death was discovered and police began their investigation that he provided this information during questioning. During the investigation, authorities uncovered another notable detail that had occurred shortly before the incident. On February 21, 2018, Sierra had contacted local authorities to report that her laptop had been stolen. When police arrived at the apartment in Euclid to check the report, Deontay was the one who answered the door and spoke with the officers. However, the officers did not enter the apartment at that time. Later, after the full situation became clearer, many observers noted that if officers had conducted an inspection inside the apartment that day, they might have discovered Aniya's alarming condition much earlier. After the unusual signs inside the apartment and the child's condition were documented, both Sierra Day and Deontay Lewis were taken into custody for questioning. During interviews with investigators, Sierra stated that around March 8th, Aniya began showing symptoms similar to the flu and had vomited after eating at a Red Lobster restaurant. According to Sierra, she and Deontay tried giving Aniya light foods, such as soup, and also gave her pain medication. But the child's condition did not improve. Sierra also said that Aniya could not even manage to drink a sip of ginger ale. Even so, Sierra claimed she had at times believed her daughter was simply pretending to be ill. While explaining the situation to investigators, she also said that Aniya had, quoting her words, scared herself so much that she caused her own tragedy. Sierra stated that after bathing her daughter, Aniya said she felt sleepy and wanted to rest. Hours later, Sierra eventually called a 24-hour medical advice line for guidance. But during that entire period, she did not take Aniya to a doctor or seek direct medical care, even though the child's condition was reportedly worsening inside the apartment. Throughout the questioning, Sierra Day repeatedly attempted to shift responsibility onto Deontay Lewis, claiming that he was the one in charge of Aniya's daily meals and care, rather than herself. Sierra also stated that Deontay had acted violently toward the child on multiple occasions and had sometimes used a belt during those incidents. However, when investigators compared her statements with the evidence they had collected, the picture of what had happened inside the apartment gradually became clearer. After the interviews, Both Sierra and Deonte were charged with several serious offenses related to Aniya's tragic death, including charges connected to causing the victim's death, severe harm, permitting abuse, child endangerment, and destruction of evidence. Meanwhile, investigators also gathered footage from security cameras at several businesses in the area. CCTV recordings showed that on the evening before Aniya fell into critical condition, Sierra and Deonte were seen at a Chipotle restaurant, where they sat and ate burritos. Afterward, the two were also captured on camera at a nearby Walmart store. The footage showed them purchasing snacks and several household items, including cleaning products. Meanwhile, according to the later investigation, Aniya was at home at that time, in extremely serious condition. The forensic examination later conducted by Dr. Joseph Falo, Deputy Medical Examiner of the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office, revealed what Aniya had endured in the period before her death was discovered. According to the report, the examination found multiple indicators that Aniya had been living in a state of prolonged neglect, along with injuries that had existed for a significant period of time. At the time she was documented, the child weighed only about 26 pounds, far below the typical weight for a child of her age. Forensic specialists also determined that a bruise on the right side of Aniya's forehead had likely appeared about 1 week earlier, while injuries around the eye area were believed to have occurred roughly 2 days before her death. In addition, small hemorrhaging marks around the eyes were recorded, suggesting that Aniya's body had endured physical trauma over a period of time. The forensic report also identified a serious injury inside the head. According to medical experts, this condition had developed gradually over several weeks, leading to widespread head trauma and severely affecting neurological functions, including movement and communication. Dr. Fellow also documented signs of prolonged malnutrition, indicating that Aniya's body had been weakening for some time beforehand. After reviewing the full set of findings, he concluded that the cause of Aniya's death was severe brain injury combined with long-term malnutrition. The manner of death was later classified by the medical examiner's office as a homicide. During the analysis of data from the suspect's mobile phones, investigators discovered a video recorded at approximately 3:28 p.m. on March 10, 2018, just 1 day before Aniya entered critical condition leading to her death. The footage showed Sierra and Deonte recording private moments involving themselves. This detail intensified public outrage when it became known that, at that same time, 4-year-old Aniya was believed to be inside the apartment in extremely serious health condition. The case was later brought to trial, and the search for justice for Aniya formally began when the proceedings opened on February 28, 2019. Throughout the court process, prosecutors presented a series of evidence and witness testimony, gradually reconstructing what the child had endured over an extended period. The documents and statements introduced in court indicated that Aniya had been living in an environment of severe neglect for a significant amount of time before the tragic events occurred inside the apartment where she lived with her mother. Throughout the trial, the defense attempted to argue that the injuries on Aniya's body could have resulted from accidents or outside factors not directly connected to the defendants. However, that argument was quickly challenged when prosecutors presented extensive medical evidence, along with testimony from a total of 37 witnesses. Those witnesses included daycare staff who had previously cared for Aniya, emergency responders who arrived at the scene, social workers, family members, and others who had interacted with the child in the months before the incident. medical personnel told the jury about the severe physical decline they observed when they reached Aniya on the day of the emergency, emphasizing that the signs suggested the child had not received adequate care for a prolonged period. Prosecutors also showed surveillance footage in court that captured Sierra and Deontay eating at a local restaurant and later shopping at a nearby Walmart store, where they purchased household items including cleaning products, just hours before Aniya's condition was discovered. During the proceedings, many people in the courtroom noted that Sierra displayed little visible emotion, even when images related to Aniya's condition were shown to the jury. Prosecutors argued that this demeanor reflected a lack of responsibility and used it to strengthen their case before the jury. During the trial, the judge also ruled that the bail for each defendant would remain set at $1 million. One of the most emotional moments during the trial came from the testimony of Aniya's biological father, Aniya Day-Garrett. Speaking from the witness stand, Aniya described the deep love he had for his daughter and recalled the many efforts he made to protect her, even though there were times when he felt powerless in the situation. He remembered the last time he saw Aniya alive, during a court-supervised visitation. According to Aniya, the little girl appeared thin and much more withdrawn compared to the cheerful, energetic child he had known before. He also told the jury that Aniya's personality had begun to change noticeably after she started living with her mother, and that the change became even more apparent after Deontay entered their lives. During his testimony, Aniya did not hide his disappointment with the state's child protection system, as well as with the earlier legal decision when Sierra obtained a protective order against him. According to Aniya, that order significantly limited his ability to stay involved and monitor his daughter's well-being at the very time he believed Aniya needed protection the most. In the end, after several days of trial and careful review of all the evidence, the jury delivered a verdict that both Sierra Day and Deontay Lewis were legally responsible for all charges connected to the tragic case of Aniya. During the sentencing, the judge described what happened to the child as something deeply disturbing and emphasized that the tragedy could likely have been prevented if the earlier warnings had been addressed properly. According to the court's ruling, Sierra Day, who was 24 years old at the time, was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Deontay Lewis, 27, also received a life sentence, but will be eligible for parole consideration after serving 20 years. After the case, Aniya's death forced the state of Ohio to re-examine the shortcomings within its child protection system. Public outrage quickly spread and turned into strong calls for reform and monitoring and intervention procedures, with the hope that tragedies like this would not happen again in the future. After the criminal trial, Aniya continued pursuing justice for his daughter through a civil lawsuit filed against the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services. In the lawsuit, he alleged that the agency had committed serious failures and had not fulfilled its responsibility to protect children, even though it had previously received multiple reports concerning signs of violence and neglect involving Aniya. The legal filing stated that significant gaps in the oversight system had allowed Aniya to remain in a dangerous environment, despite the fact that she had been enrolled in 2 state-regulated childcare facilities. Although the lawsuit sought financial compensation, the broader goal pursued by Aniya and his legal team was to highlight the urgent need for reform within the child protection system. They argued that if authorities had carried out a thorough investigation and intervened in time when the first warning signs appeared, Aniya's tragedy could have been prevented. Afterward, an independent investigation was launched to review how authorities had handled the reports related to Aniya. The findings of that investigation, along with internal disciplinary records, revealed multiple serious failures in the monitoring procedures and case management practices of the agencies involved. The documents showed that several caseworkers responsible for Aniya's file had failed to properly follow up on allegations of violence, did not carry out necessary checks, and did not fully document key findings in accordance with agency policy. Among the issues identified was the fact that numerous reports from the Harbor Crest daycare, which clearly documented injuries on Aniya's body, were set aside without a deeper investigation. In addition, coordination between the caseworkers and other professionals, such as police officers, medical personnel, and daycare staff, was very limited, preventing important information from being fully cross-checked. The investigation also found that supervisory levels had failed to ensure that their staff strictly followed procedures for handling suspected child abuse cases. These shortcomings ultimately contributed to the tragedy involving Aniya. After the investigation's results were released, some employees involved were disciplined, while others were required to leave their positions. At the same time, the county's Child Services Agency was required to implement several major changes in its policies and operational procedures in an effort to prevent similar incidents in the future. In addition, the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services took action against the 2 child care facilities connected to the case, resulting in Harbor Crest Daycare and the Get Ready, Set, Grow preschool being shut down indefinitely. For Caso Garrett, Aniya's father, the journey to seek justice for his daughter continued even after the trial. In June 2020, Cuyahoga County agreed to pay $3 million as part of a settlement in the civil lawsuit. Many people viewed this decision as an acknowledgement of serious failures within the local child protection system, while also highlighting the responsibility of authorities who did not intervene in time to protect Aniya Day-Garrett while she was still alive. Before that, Aniya's short life had been honored with an emotional 2-day memorial. On Friday, March 16, 2018, a visitation was held from 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Strouders Funeral Home, where family members, friends, and many members of the community gathered to express their grief. In the quiet and deeply emotional atmosphere, Caso Garrett broke down in tears as he spoke about his daughter, saying that Aniya had been a small but radiant light in his life, and that her story must never be forgotten. The following day, Saturday, March 17th, the funeral service for Aniya was held at 1 p.m. at River of Life Ministries Church on Lakeshore Boulevard in the city of Euclid, Ohio. As the funeral procession moved through the familiar streets of the city, many people stood silently along the roadside to say goodbye. The small pink casket, decorated with a crown, was placed on a horse-drawn carriage, creating a scene that was both solemn and heartbreaking. The ceremony was not only a farewell to a life that ended far too soon, but also a powerful reminder of society's responsibility to protect vulnerable children. After the sentencing, Deontay Lewis filed an appeal, arguing that the trial had been unfair and that the evidence presented in court was not sufficient to support the jury's conclusion. However, in 2022, the Ohio Court of Appeals reviewed the entire case record and ultimately rejected the appeal. This decision meant that both the verdict and the life sentence previously imposed remained in place. Looking back at the entire story, what continues to weigh heavily on many people is the fact that Aniya Day-Garrett, at only 4 years old, had tried several times to speak up for herself. She told adults around her that she was in danger, from daycare staff to her own father. Aniya pointed out the injuries on her body and attempted to explain what was happening to her. Yet those calls for help were ultimately not taken seriously enough. Many warning signs appeared, but did not lead to timely action, and the very system created to protect children failed to fulfill its role in Aniya's case. Often, when people speak about cases involving children, they mention a painful reality. Most young victims are unable to clearly protect themselves or ask for help. But the story of Aniya Day-Garrett was different. Even at just 4 years old, she tried many times to speak about what she was going through. Aniya understood that she was in danger. She told the adults around her that she was being hurt and tried to point to the injuries on her body. From daycare workers to her own father, Aniya attempted to speak up in the only ways a small child could. Sadly, those cries for help were not heard in time. Too many warning signs appeared, yet the necessary intervention did not happen soon enough. And by the time people fully recognized what had been happening, it was already too late. The little girl who once brought laughter to those around her had passed away in a silence that should never have occurred. Aniya's story stands as a powerful reminder of the consequences that can come from indifference and delay within the systems created to protect children. At the same time, this tragedy has also sparked efforts for change. Aniya's father, along with many members of the community, has continued to speak out and push for reforms, hoping that other children will not have to endure the same fate in the future. Even so, when we look back at many cases we have heard about in true crime documentary stories, a troubling reality still remains. Similar tragedies can continue to happen if warning signs are not recognized and acted upon in time. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If Aniya's story made you reflect, please share this video so more people can learn about it, and leave a comment as a way to remember her. And if you are interested in the stories explored in these true crime documentary videos, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video to show your support. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again in the next story.